Hello everyone, we're looking at rounding to 10, 100 and 1000 today, and we're going to round any number at all to these three particular measurements. Okay, so we're going to start by rounding to the nearest 10. Okay, and I'm going to show you, obviously if you're really very clever, you better spot these kind of things in your head straight away, but I'm going to show you a method for doing that, just so that if you're not sure you can always check your answer as well. Okay, so if we're rounding to the nearest 10, all I want you to do is to go to the digit which is in this position, the tens position. So this is units, this is tens. So I want you to underline the digit in the tens column, and the indicator, the one which is telling me how I'm going to round, is the one to its right. So you draw a little arrow at the digit that you're looking at. This is my indicator, okay? Now if that number is a 4, 3, 2, 1 or 0, okay, so less than a 5, that tells me I'm going to round down. If it's a 5 or above, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, that tells me I'm going to round up. Okay, so in this case this is a 3, so this is going to tell me to round down, and then so my indicator tells me what I'm going to do, but the digit I change is this underlined one here. This is the one which might get changed. Okay, so because I'm rounding down, you might think, oh well, this 6 becomes a 5. No. In fact, the word or the phrase rounding down is a bit confusing, because what it really means is you keep this underlined digit the same. Okay, so this one stays the same, and everything else to the right of it, everything else, in this case there's only one number here, but in everything else will become a 0. So in this case, this number, when rounded to the nearest 10, becomes 60. Okay, so let me remind you what I did again. I found the tens column. In case it was a 6, I underlined it. The number to the right was my indicator. In this case it was the 3. That's my indicator. It tells me whether to go up or down. In this case, because it's less than a 5, it tells me to go down. Okay, but that going down actually means keep the 6 the same, and everything else becomes a 0. And this makes sense, because if you look at my number line here, here's 60 and 70. These are the nearest tens either side of 63. And I put 63 on here. What's 10? Which 10 is it closer to? Is it closer to 60? Is this the nearest 10? Or is this the nearest 10? Well, obviously 60 is the nearest 10. So that's why I can tell that this is the correct answer. I've rounded 63 to the nearest 10. Let's try on 3 more examples here. Round to the nearest 10 these numbers. So remember what I do. I find the tens column. Unit tens. This is the tens column. Here's my indicator. What does my indicator tell me to do? It tells me to round down, because it's less than a 5. So when it says round down, what it really means is keep this the same. So this is going to be the 3. I haven't got anywhere near this, so that stays a 3. But 2, because I've rounded down, I keep that the same, and everything else becomes a 0. Okay, so that's how you get that number here. Let's look at the same thing here. I'm looking for the nearest 10 again. So I underline the tens digit, and I look for my indicator. Here we go, the number 7. Okay, well 7 is above 5. Okay, so that tells me I'm going to round up. So I go back to my underlined digit here, and it moves up. I'm rounding up. So the 1 didn't touch the 1, nowhere near that. I'm only ever changing this underlined one and everything to its right. Okay, so the 1 stays the same. The 4 was rounded up, so it became a 5, and everything else, what's it become? Yeah, it becomes a 0. Okay, now you can start looking at these and think, well, this is common sense. 322 is obviously closer to 320 than the next one up, which would be 330. Okay, so that's correct. And similarly here, 147, is that closer to 140 or 150? Well, we've shown by our method it's closer to 150, but we also know from common sense that it's closer to 150 than to 140. Same effects, same thing here. Round to the nearest 10. Units tens. Where's my indicator? It's here on the right. Okay, and what does a 5 tell me to do? Well, this is obviously an interesting example because it's on the fence. Maths has decided that if it's a 5, you round up. Okay, so these first 2 digits, well, I didn't touch them, they stay the same. But this one underlined here, that was told to round up by this 5, so the 7 becomes an 8, and everything else, yeah, that's right, becomes a 0. Okay, and a little way you can check that you've got these right is when we're rounding to the nearest 10 under 1,000. Well, you can see it in this 10 here. There's only 1 0 here. There should always be 1 0 at the end, at least 1 0, okay, at the end of your number here, okay. Normally it will just be 1, but at least 1, okay, and that will tell you that you've done the right thing. You should end in a 0, okay. We're now going to look at rounding to the nearest 100, okay. The same method still applies, but rather than looking for the tens column, I now look for the hundreds column. So units, tens, hundreds, okay, and I look for my indicator, and it's the number, again, to the right. In this case, it's the 8. So what does this tell me to do? Well, an 8 tells me to round up. So to the nearest 100, the 6 didn't touch that, but the 3 gets rounded up by my indicator, so it becomes the 4, and everything else, yeah, you guessed it, is zeros, okay? 6400, 6,400. Let's try a few more of these, okay? 298. Well, I'm looking for the nearest 100, so I go to units, tens, hundreds column. Where's my indicator? It's the 9. What does 9 indicate to me? It indicates round up. So my 2 becomes a 3, and everything else, zeros, okay? Similarly here, round to the nearest 100, units, tens, hundreds. That's my indicator. Yeah, that's right, it's the 5. Now what did we say 5 to? Does that round up or down? Yeah, 5 rounds up, okay? So my 7 didn't get touched. The 4, it was rounded up because of my indicator, so my 4 became a 5. And everything else, 0, 0, okay? Finally, on the rounding to 100 one, we look for the hundreds, units, tens, hundreds. Look for my indicator. This time it's the 1. Okay. 6 didn't get touched. Now the 2, did it get rounded up or down by this 1? Well, obviously a 1 rounds down, but that just means that it stays the same. Everything else, 0, 0. And similarly here, when I'm rounding to the nearest 100, I will usually get 2 zeros on the end of my number, okay, so I know that I've got it correct, okay. And finally, round to the nearest 1,000, well, I will do this one quickly because it's nice and straightforward, same principle. I'm now looking for the thousands columns, units, tens, hundreds, thousands. I look for my indicator, here it is, the 4, and that tells me to round down. Well, that just means that the 4 stays the same, and everything else, everything to the right of my underlined digit, becomes 0. 1, 2, 3 of them. Okay, so 4,499 to the nearest 1,000 is closer to 4,000 than 5,000. So the last 3 examples of this to the nearest 1,000 here. Okay, well, here's my units, tens, hundreds, thousands column. Here's my indicator. What do we say 5 said to do? 5 rounds up. So the 7 becomes an 8, and everything else, 0, 0, 0. Let's have another look at another one. Here's my thousands column. Here's my indicator. What does the 0 tell me to do? It tells me to round down. So that 3 stays the same. Everything else becomes a 0. Okay, 3,000. Okay, and finally the last one. Here's my thousands column. Here's my indicator, the one to the right. What does the 6 tell me to do? It tells me to round up. So my 8 becomes a 9, and everything else, boom, boom, boom. And as expected, when I'm rounding to the nearest 1,000, I should end with 3 zeros at the end of my number. Okay, that's rounding to 10, 100, 1,000. Not too tricky, I hope, but again, practice will make perfect on these. The more you do, the easier they become, and the quicker you'll get at them. Any